Welcome to another episode of Forgotten Uniques. In this series, I'm covering unique items in Path of Exile that aren't being used very much at the moment, taking a look at how exactly they function and how their mechanics interact with other aspects of the game, especially in regards to some of the more recent additions such as new unique items or Ascendancy reworks. If you'd like to check out the full Forgotten Unique series, I'll link the playlist in the description below. Today's video is all about Nametaker. This unique one-handed sword was first introduced to the game in patch 3.23 Affliction as an exclusive drop from the monsters in the Wildwood. Then in patch 3.24 Necropolis, Nametaker was added to the core game and made available as a core drop pool unique. Now, with this item being such a recent addition to the game, the Nametaker appearing in the series titled Forgotten Uniques definitely doesn't feel quite right. After all, in the literal sense, this item is probably not forgotten by too many players just yet, but the Nametaker does fit into the criteria I'm using to select uniques for this series, with the sword only being used by a handful of characters across all league types in Necropolis. So let's take a look at the modifiers on the Nametaker. 20 to 40% increased critical strike chance. This is a local increased critical strike chance modifier, and the numbers on this one are quite good if you can secure a good modifier roll. A tier 1 increased critical strike chance modifier on a crafted sword can roll up to 38%, so at the maximum roll of 40%, this is more like a tier 0 modifier, and this would boost the critical strike chance of the weapon up to 7%. It's worth mentioning that you can also make good use of the Harvest enchantment for weapon quality converted to critical strike chance on this weapon, because the base quality boosting up the very low flat fizz on the weapon won't be doing much, as the weapon relies heavily on external sources of flat damage. Next up we have two Leech modifiers. 2% of physical attack damage leached as life, and 2% of physical attack damage leached as mana. So these are going to provide you with a source of leech for both life and mana. However, unfortunately they're only limited to the physical portion of any attack damage you're dealing, and physical attack leech for both life and mana are amongst the most common leech modifiers that are available in the game. To add to this, it's quite unlikely that you'll be dealing much physical damage with attacks, as large sources of flat physical damage are somewhat hard to come by and often more difficult to utilise, such as the Bloodthirst support. It's a lot more likely that a build using this item would be utilising flat elemental damage instead, in which case these leech modifiers wouldn't be all that useful. Now we move on to the unique modifiers on the Nametaker. Hits with this weapon have plus 10% to critical strike multiplier per enemy power, and 5% of leech from hits with this weapon is instant per enemy power. The terminology enemy power is referring to a mechanic which, prior to this unique item, was exclusive to Warcries. Enemy power is a number which is attached to a monster based on their rarity. Normal or white monsters have 1 power, magic or blue monsters have 2 power, rare monsters have 10 power, and unique monsters have 20 power. I should also mention that player characters have 5 power, in case you were planning on playing some PvP. So this power system will determine the stats that are granted by these modifiers whenever an attack with this weapon makes contact with a monster. Here's the breakdown of the stats you'll receive from these modifiers depending on the rarity of the monsters you're attacking. Hits against normal monsters will have plus 10% to critical strike multiplier and 5% of your leech providing instant recovery. Hits against magic monsters will have 20% crit multi and 10% of your leech providing instant recovery. Hits against rare monsters will have 100% crit multi and 50% of your leech providing instant recovery. And hits against unique monsters will have 200% crit multi and 100% of your leech providing instant recovery. Remember that these bonuses will only apply to hits using the Nametaker specifically, and this is an important distinction in regards to mechanics such as Dual Strike, an attack which requires a character to be dual wielding and uses both weapons to perform a single strike. When this happens, each weapon will roll accuracy and critical strike chances separately, and they will also roll their own damage ranges and only combine the expected damage of each weapon into the final strike, which is one package of damage in a single hit. The critical strike multiplier and instant leech from the Nametaker can therefore only impact the expected damage from the portion of the hit which originated from that weapon. It won't apply to both weapons. However, this means that the Nametaker has quite good synergy with Dual Strike of Ambidexterity, because this transfigured version of Dual Strike has an emphasis on dealing the majority of the attack's damage from the main hand, while you can take advantage of the lack of attack speed modifiers on the Nametaker by using a fast APS weapon in the offhand slot. So the Nametaker provides a way to scale your damage in the form of a potentially very big chunk of crit multi depending on the type of monster you're fighting, but what it lacks is base damage, and this needs to be solved by obtaining sources of flat added damage. Stacking things like added lightning damage support with flat added damage modifiers on rings and amulets, or even the use of Replica Alberon's Warpath on a strength stacking setup to gain a lot of flat added chaos damage. But this is where Nametaker runs into a bit of a problem, because being a unique one-handed sword which provides a way to scale damage but without any kind of flat damage of its own, is directly competing with Paradoxica, another one-handed unique sword which provides double damage as its method of scaling damage, whilst also potentially having some other useful modifiers as well. Paradoxica's double damage is very likely to outscale the crit multi from Nametaker unless you're somehow extremely limited on the amount of crit multi you're able to obtain elsewhere. Which means that for Nametaker to be useful in a direct comparison with Paradoxica, the instant leech modifier must be very valuable for the build. Now usually I don't look into specific builds for the uniques in this series, but I think for the Nametaker it's actually quite relevant to do this because of just how interchangeable this unique sword is with Paradoxica. Some of you may be familiar with the mana stacking Scion build which uses Rage Vortex of Berserking. I believe MB Extreme made a build guide for this in 3.24, but there are also other creators with videos about this build back in 3.23 as well. This build basically uses mana stacking to gain a huge amount of flat damage from Arcane Cloak, Mind of the Council, and Mana Storm, which got a very big buff in 3.24, making this build even stronger. It then uses all of that flat damage with Rage Vortex of Berserking in a setup which pretty much plays like an auto-bomber. The comparison of Paradoxica and Nametaker in this particular build is an interesting one because whilst Paradoxica will almost certainly outscale Nametaker in terms of damage, the instant leech gain from Nametaker becomes incredibly valuable when you're depleting 100% of your mana whenever you use a spell due to Mana Storm. Especially when you consider that mana is going to be most of the effective health pool for these builds, due to Mind over Matter, so the faster you can get back to full mana after spending all of it, the better, and Nametaker allows you to do that pretty much instantly as long as you're hitting monsters. Of the characters playing this build in Necropolis, 53 of them are using Paradoxica compared to just 8 using Nametaker. So even for a build where the instant leech is very valuable, why isn't Nametaker being used more often? Well, I think the direct competition with Paradoxica is the biggest reason, but one of the things I haven't mentioned up to this point is the existence of instant leech as a mastery on the passive skill tree. In a way, this mastery undermines the modifier on Nametaker, as builds using Paradoxica can make do with the smaller slice of instant leech and end up dealing more damage. If instant leech was significantly more difficult to obtain, like it used to be in the game, then this modifier on Nametaker would make it more of a considerable option for builds such as the one discussed earlier, especially with those builds being fully reliant on leech as a primary source of their mana recovery. Thank you to my channel supporters on Patreon. I appreciate your ongoing support. If you enjoy the content I make here on YouTube, consider joining them by becoming a patron and gaining access to some exclusive perks in the process. All of the information can be found by following the link in the description below. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.